Hey everyone, this is Shane Grove, the host of the From the Shadows podcast, and I just want to give you a quick little heads up on this episode with Colin. We did this in two parts. The first part, the second half of the episode, had some technical difficulties, so we came back and redid some of it with Colin, and he added some stuff that he remembered in the meantime. So if there's a little lax there about 60 minutes in, and a reference to us doing it before, I don't want to make people think they're going crazy. It's just we had to do the episode twice. So we hope you enjoy. It's a great episode, and thanks for listening. Bye bye. Hey, welcome everybody to the From the Shadows podcast. I'm your host Shane Grove, and with me as always is the super producer Jason.
Greetings, everyone.
So Jason, it's we're getting close to episode 200.
We're right around the corner from it.
We haven't really talked about that yet. So I don't. When this episode comes out, we'll be even closer to episode 200. So I want to throw this out there because we always ask people to contact us on social media for tell us their stories, which is our guest today contacted me on social media. That's why we're going to hear his crazy stories here in a little bit. But I'd kind of like to hear who or what topic, what subject, maybe what guest some of our listeners would like to hear for a special 200th episode. What do you think about that, Jason?
That'd be a great idea. That would be a great idea.
Well, I'm just going to say, do not say Josh Gates. I've been trying. For some reason, Josh Gates is not returning any of my messages or phone calls now. He apparently he's too big for the From the Shadows podcast.
I have heard that from several other people. It's not just our podcast.
So I want to encourage everybody, go to our social media, like on Facebook, we've got the After the Shadows forum or the From the Shadows podcast page. You can find us on Instagram at From the Shadows Podcast. You can find me on Instagram at Shane Grove Author, or message me on my Facebook page, or go to our website, FromTheShadowsPodcast.com, and just contact us through there. And let us know. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want to hear. We want to plan something big for our 200th episode. It's kind of a big deal. Jason, can you believe that we're almost to 200 episodes?
It's gone by really fast, I'm telling you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm glad that we continue to grow and we can provide a platform that for our listening audience, and I really love how they interact and they share their stories with us, because that's what makes it a great platform right there. We really appreciate it when people contact us with their experiences and their stories, because that brings us one step closer to being able to get some answers on some of these things that are unexplained, and that's why they're in the shadows.
Absolutely. And hey, our 200th episode might just be some really good guests, that not famous people, but people with great stories, that reach out and tell us, and we have them on. I mean, I don't know. Those seem to be our best episodes anyway. So nothing against the famous people. Sorry, Jason. So with that, we want to bring on a young man who contacted me through social media, and I've spoken to him on the phone. Jason, you really don't know any of his stories. I haven't told you.
Yeah, you've left me in the dark on this one, but I'm excited. I'm chomping at the bit to hear it.
But I believe this is our first guest from Mexico. Colin, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, so Colin, I guess let's just get into it. What struck you that you thought, okay, I got to contact Shane and tell him my stories, and then let's just get into what it is that you've had as experiences through the years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was raised in Brush Prairie, Washington, and lived all over the Pacific Northwest. I ended up moving to Mexico, and about 5 or 6 years ago, I was surf fishing early in the morning, and about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, there was something large on the beach that I was walking towards, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And the closer that I got, I started having all these weird, crazy thoughts and things like that. And it kind of started bringing back some things that had happened to me. And when I got up to it, one of the thoughts that was going through my brain when I was walking up to it was, this looks like some kind of weird ape or something. And then I thought Sasquatch, and then all of a sudden all this shit started coming out from my past. And what it was actually was, it was about 1,000-pound sea lion that had been killed by a shark and that had washed up onto the beach, and it was rolling back and forth in the surf.
Really?
So,
Wow.
So,
but I could.
So seeing that, like
the movement of it going back and forth looked like it was alive, and it was super dark. And so there was a half moon probably, so there was enough light that I could see a silhouette, and all that I could see was this huge, large, looked like a figure kind of going back and forth into the surf. So at first I was thinking it's digging for crabs or what it was. I wasn't initially thinking anything like Bigfoot, and then all of a sudden I just started remembering stuff that had happened, and stuff that had happened from an early age all the way through my childhood, all the way up into my early, 20s, and so on and so on. And so then I started diving down rabbit holes of, started out with crypto PTSD, watching on YouTube, which led to every podcast you could possibly imagine. And ever since then, I've just been diving down rabbit holes looking for answers, which creates more answers. And here I am. So, and I came on here for a specific reason, though, and I want to say this because I really feel this is important. I'm on here to actually help myself. So I'm here to deal with some of the stuff that has happened to me, and some of the things that I've had reoccurring dreams. I obsess about certain things. My wife thinks I'm freaking nuts because I'm trying to find answers for everything. And so I'm actually on here to help me move forward in my life, because talking about it with people that don't ridicule you, which I've had happen, and things like that, it feels good. It really does. So that's why I'm here. And I hope that everyone else who's listening to this, who's had stuff happen, hopefully it'll help them. Plus, I think that the government should be telling people these things are out there. So
I agree. I agree with everything that you said. And that's what we're here for. Yep.
Yep. So Colin, then what has it been then that you started to remember that you obviously then suppressed because it was traumatic then?
So some of the major stuff that happened to me is I've been screamed at a couple times, which I talked with you about, Shane, a little bit. And I kind of, in the short conversation that we had, we didn't get into a lot of details, but those 2 times when that happened were more of the traumatic stuff that really affected me. And then I've had a lot of other things happen that I didn't really realize what was actually happening, because I didn't, Sasquatch wasn't on my radar. I wasn't thinking Sasquatch. I was in a different mindset. I was doing different things, that I was just focused on different things, but things were happening around me that I didn't really realize. And so all these years now, 20 some years later, I've been piecing it all together, and it's pretty nuts, actually. So,
okay. So let's go back to the first thing that you remember happening then, that you've sat back and said, okay, this is what I remember.
So the first thing that I remember was when I was in 3rd grade in hunting camp, and my dad having an experience. And I remember my dad and my grandfather and my uncle arguing about it at hunting camp. And I was with my brother, and I remember my dad telling my grandfather that this happened. I don't know exactly what happened. And I remember my dad's wife, Sharon, at the time, yelling at him and telling him, "You're going to scare the kids." And so my grandfather turned around and looked at us and said, "We're just talking about grizzly bears." Well, now that I'm older, I realize that's not what they were talking about. And I've asked my dad about it, and he doesn't talk about it. And when I do talk to him about it, all he says is Bigfoot lives. That's it. And he walks off. He's super old school. He doesn't say much. So he also,
he won't even though you've come to him and said,
I told him my stories and talked to him about my stuff. He listens, and in the end, he just says Bigfoot lives, and he walks off. That's it.
Oh man.
So he also didn't hunt much after that, and I don't know if that's why whatever happened to him. But we never went to hunting camp after that, and I was raised in hunting camp. Like, I mean, we were shooting deer from as big as I could hold a gun. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, where was your
that was actually in the Starkey unit in Oregon.
Okay.
So we used to go down and meet my grandfather there. So we would go hunt the Starkey unit with my family. So that was in Oregon, and I don't know the details of what happened to my father. So, but that's the first memory I have of something like that. And then, I mean, just things have happened. I mean, I was raised in Yakult, Brush Prairie, Battleground. I mean, all those areas up there, which you guys might not be that familiar with, but basically I was raised in backwoods, hillbilly. You went to the woods when you wanted to get away or you wanted to have a good time, or it was the weekend and you wanted to drink beer and party with your friends, or, try to, get with a girl or whatever it was. You went camping. That's what you did. And I've had weird stuff happen there up by Suisun Creek. Me and my buddy one time, and I mean, we were young. Gosh, I was like 1993 or something like that, somewhere around there. We parked and walked down and built a bed out of moss and ferns one night, and we were just pitching rooster tails along Suisun Creek. And we woke up one morning and something was walking around us. And I remember looking at my buddy Dan, who was a little older than me, and I was like, dude, there's someone walking around us. And he looked up at me. And I'll never forget this. He had snot running down his nose and his hay fever and everything was so bad. And he looked at me like, it's a deer. And he just laid back down. But the funny part was that deer don't circle around you. Whatever it was a crunch, 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 and it kept circling around us. That was pretty weird. I don't know what it was. I'm not saying that was a Sasquatch. I'm just saying that I don't usually have deer circle around me like that. So that was kind of weird. And then I've had stuff happen at Packwood Lake. I've had stuff happen in Idaho, and then I had most of the stuff happen when I was actually growing marijuana up by Yakult.
So you guys are let me get this straight, because you said this is what you guys did for fun. This does not sound like fun to me, to go out and sleep on a bed of moss with no tent. Like, you guys weren't under a tent or anything?
No, that's like the best bed ever. You pull the moss off the trees, and then it's a little dirty, so you don't want to lay on it because of insects. So you just cut down a bunch of furs and ferns and lay it on top, and it's. I mean, that's comfort. It's like a Sealy Posturepedic.
Oh, geez.
Nice.
Okay. All right. I mean, that man, oh man, that sounds crazy. So you just woke up and something's just walking around and it's dark, and you can't.
It was light out, actually. It was early in the morning. Sun was coming up, and I remember waking up and I remember hearing something kind of walk around us. And that's when I kind of nudged Dan, and I was like, man, there's something out there. And his allergies were so bad, he wasn't even paying attention. And it just kind of walked around us for a couple minutes, and then it just walked off, whatever it was.
Now, did you realize it because of, were you able to smell something, or was it just real heavy? Like, you can tell it had a heavy footfall, or what?
Yeah, you could hear the footsteps. It wasn't like a deer or an elk or anything. It sounded, now that I'm older and I understand things better, I believe it was bipedal. I'm not 100% on that. It was just it's one of the weird things that happened to me along the way that I wouldn't be surprised if it was a Sasquatch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't a deer. I highly doubt it was a bear or anything like that. We had no food on us or anything. We just drove up there. We were just going to hike down the creek, spend the night, hike back, and come home. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't like we had coolers with food, or we had our spinning rods, and that's it. We had our spinning rods and some rain jackets, and that's it. Where I'm from, it rains 8 months out of the year. So you learn to just kind of play in the mud, and you play outside. It's a gray drizzle most of the time.
Right.
Well, I'm real curious about, growing up in that part of the country. Is that like, do people like take Bigfoot as a creature out there just for granted and tell you that, hey, yeah, you're going to run into one, or is it still as taboo to talk about it, even, like it is around here in Ohio?
So growing up, I never it was never anything that I had really talked about with anything or anything. The time when I was a kid at hunting camp was like the first time that anything had ever really happened. And then I remember we were part of a saddle club off of 117th Street. And I remember something happening to one of the people that had horses up on Silver Star, and one of his horses got injured. And I remember him talking to my dad, and I remember my dad saying it's possibly was a Sasquatch. And then I remember his wife again, Sharon, freaking out and telling him he was nuts and it was probably a colt that hurt the horse and all this stuff. Well, there's no freaking colts that live up in Silver Star Mountain. If you know where I'm from, I mean, I don't know of any colts or anyone that's ever lived up there. I mean, it's out in the middle of nowhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like dense forest up there, isn't it?
No, it's super dense. I mean, everywhere you go up here where I'm from is you got really heavy underbrush. It's hard to get through. I mean, the one of the prime to hunt deer where I'm from, one of my weapons of choice was a 12 gauge shotgun with a slug or a 30-30 lever, because it's not open. You're close range.
Yeah.
Like whatever it's super thick. You got blackberries, you got underbrush. I mean, you got old growth. I mean, it's thick for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember all that. That's all from when I was really young. And then that's what I remember as a kid, but it wasn't really talked about or people, you know what I mean? It wasn't a topic of conversation. No one really talked about it. So, and then later on in life, every year we would do a backpacking trip to Packwood Lake every May 31st. We started out doing it. It was my buddy's birthday. We'd take a group of us up there, anywhere from 10 to 12 of us. And the crazy part about this is there was 10 of us up there, 11 of us up there. We were up there around 1996. I was a junior in high school. We hiked into Packwood Lake. It's a 4.5 mile hike. It's up by Packwood and Randall and up in those areas. And we woke up one morning and there was footprints that had came out of the creek that feeds into the lake. And the crazy part was that I remember some very specific things about the footprints that are odd. I never knew what it was. We thought it was some crazy guy that was huge with huge feet that was just walking around. I mean, it had snowed on that backpacking trip. So we used to do annual backpacking trips up to the Goat Rocks, which is about 10 miles, and then into Packwood Lake, which is about 5 miles. And those were annual trips for us. And the crazy part is when we woke up, the footprints had looked like they came out of the creek, which fed into the lake, but they stopped. I remember Ian, who was his family laid bricks for a living. He was a pretty big guy. He's probably 6'1", 250, he's big, his feet are probably 11 and a half, 12 inches. And the footprints were as big as Ian's Sorel boots that he was wearing. Because we were taking the strides and Ian was putting his foot down, trying to make them as deep as the footprints. Right. Mm-hmm. And he would actually literally have to push down on it. And the strides were really long and and so I'm just going to tell you what I remember. And then you guys can just kind of go from there, because a lot of this stuff happened a long time ago and I haven't talked about a lot of the stuff. So I remember the strides being really far apart. I remember they were as big as Ian Sorel's, and I remember that there was a weird arch in the middle. And I remember pointing out the arch to my buddy Dan and saying, that's a really weird arch. And we were trying to figure out what it was, right? Mm-hmm. And then they kind of walked like they were going into the lake. And then about, 15 feet from the edge of the lake where it would continue into the lake, they just disappeared. They were gone, which was weird. And so weird. And then after that, we'd woke up, we're doing our normal stuff. We're out, a bunch of kids out in the woods doing what they're doing. And I remember us talking about it and someone said, oh, that's Bigfoot. Right. And we were like, oh, whatever. And then I remember Ian, the creek that they came from, there was these trees that you could climb up and you could grab the top and you could basically hang on and it would take you down to the ground. And if you were good enough, you could even grab from tree to tree and actually go from tree to tree. And Ian, I remember standing at the edge of the creek and Ian was doing that from tree to tree and he was acting like a monkey because he thought it was a joke, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember looking down the creek and with my buddy Steve, and it I remember the feeling of it didn't feel right. Like I didn't want him to go down the creek. You know what I mean? Like I got this really weird feeling like that it was the wrong thing to do. And I just felt weird. Like it just felt, you know how you just kind of get feelings that are wrong.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was one of those. And that's what happened at Packwood Lake. And that's all that happened there. So whatever.
Well, first of all, like those footprints, okay?
Right.
Nobody is out there in their bare feet doing that. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and here's the thing: it snowed on that trip, so that tells you the temperature. Mm-hmm. Like we had to hike out in snow.
Yeah, and now, and I will say, I've heard more times than not. That's the one thing is like the footprints just stop, and you don't have any idea. You know what I'm saying? They and nobody has any idea like where whatever was making the footprints went. You know what I'm saying? Like you guys didn't. You guys just stopped and
they just stopped. I thought that maybe it had somehow like jumped into the lake or something, and I'm like, God, that's like 15 feet. Like, how did that even happen? And then I thought maybe it, like I really didn't know what was going on. To be honest with you, in that situation, I was more focused on the arch and the foot because for some reason it just looked really off. Mm-hmm. And I kept trying to get everyone else to focus on that. And Dan and a couple other guys were noticing what I was noticing. And it's weird. And then the funny part about that is that my buddy Steve, who I hadn't seen in 20 years, showed up fishing here where I live now. 3.5 years ago. And so we go out fishing and we're catching up. Right. And neither of us have Facebook. So we got a hell of a lot of stuff to talk about. Right. So we're talking about families and things like that. And I asked him, I said, do you remember those footprints? And he was like, yeah. And he's a guy where he won't talk about it. Like there could be a Sasquatch that runs across his yard and he's not going to say it because he doesn't want people to think he's nuts. Right. So, and he looked at me and he said, I don't know what that was, but he said that was just really eerie is what he said. So that's the footprints that I was telling you about when we first talked, Shane. That's that situation.
Wow. And see, I think that, and I may be wrong, but from what I have read and stuff, I think that is what they call that mid-tarsal break in their foot is what you were seeing, that weird arch or what you thought was an arch.
Yeah, it looked like the middle of the foot was like pushed up, like you took your fingers and like took sand and like pushed it up into a ridge.
Yeah, it's like it's what makes their feet different from ours. It's like, and then I think that gives them the weird gait that people say they have, where it looks like their knees don't, move the same way that ours do when we walk. It gives them that different look or whatever. Which, look, I don't know. That's some creepy stuff. See, that's some creepy stuff to me. That is weird as that, because those footprints disappear, and you're saying, well, if it jumps 15 feet into the lake, which it very well could have, but I would think that anything from a standing start, it would smudge its footprints. It would push off and it would make them look different, and you could probably have told that or have to get like a running start to get a jump. They were just straight strides. There was no stutter step. There was no, you know what I mean? Like there was no, they were just footprints, and then they just disappeared. Now let me ask you this, because you were describing your friend, go bending, grabbing the trees and having them pull him up in the air, right?
Yeah, they would pull him down, so he would climb up to the tops.
And they would pull. Okay.
Then he would hold on to him, and they would pull him down, and then he was able to grab another tree, and he did it for like 4 or 5 trees before he crashed, but when he was doing it, he was like making monkey sounds, and I remember I didn't want to walk down the creek with him. I was scared enough that I didn't want to go down there. I just had this weird feeling that I didn't want to go down there. It freaked me out. I didn't know what it was. I knew something was off. You know what I mean?
Yes, I got you. I just wondered if, because I didn't totally understand, I wondered if whatever was making those footprints could have grabbed the tree and had it pull it up straight up in the air. Straight up in the air.
So the footprints came out, the creek fed into the lake, and where the footprints came out, there was a beach area that was right where along the edge of the lake where the creek fed into the lake, right? But the trees were probably 30 yards away from that, back up into the creek.
Okay. All right. Wow. So, but there you have 10. What'd you say? 10 guys.
Yeah, there was either 10 or 11 of us there. It was the same guys every year, and we'd go up there. We all saw it. We all talked about it. I mean, it was, yeah. And then the crazy part is that that was it. We never talked about it again. We never even thought about it. I told my dad about it, and he just kind of shook his head and said, "Yep," and walked off, and that was it. I mean,
wow,
that's amazing. Okay. Now I would be still talking about it every day. I mean, I wouldn't be able to stop talking about it. I'd be so amazed.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah. So
well, and the best part is having all those guys see them too.
Oh, so yeah, that's a lot of witnesses. Yeah,
that's 100%. We all saw it. Most of the encounters that I've had, most of them have been with other people. I have had some without, but most of them have been with other people. And I honestly believe that people have more encounters than what they realize. They just don't realize what's really going on, like what happened to me. Because some of the other encounters that I told you about, Shane, and we talked about were, I just didn't know what was happening. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't realize. I didn't know. Like,
yeah. And that's normal too. A lot of people say the same thing, that they've been out in the woods and they've, heard tree knocks, or they heard something whistle, or they heard, another sound, or they saw something that didn't quite click right. But until they actually had a full-on experience, they couldn't connect the dots and say, "Oh my God, I've been experiencing this." Because if you don't see something, or and are certain of what it is that's going, you can always,
you can justify it away. Yeah.
Guess it away as something else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what did we have a guest tell us, that something was getting thrown at them, and they thought maybe it was a squirrel throwing something at them in the woods,
throwing nuts.
And I'm like, he's like, "Where are you at? What kind of squirrels are you hanging out with?"
Yeah, right.
Must be some pretty big squirrels.
I mean, I never had maybe a squirrel shook its fist at me or something, but I've never had to throw anything. I mean,
they usually chirp at you. They usually sit and chirp at you and get all angry, and then run off. That's what they.
But there you go. That's a way. I mean, imagine justifying something happening by saying, "Well, I thought it was a squirrel throwing something at me," and it's like, wow, that's really reaching, So, yeah, that to me is what. You're right. A lot of people have stuff happen to them and they don't realize what it is, because they just think they can. Because having a squirrel throw something at you is a lot more.
Normal.
You can live with that a little bit better than having a Bigfoot 50 yards away hitting you with a rock. You know what I'm saying? So, wow. So okay. So what's the next event then?
As life goes on, we grow up a little bit. Some of my friends end up moving to Sun Valley, Idaho, which is actually Ketchum, Idaho. So I moved with them. I moved out at a really young age. I have been on my own for a really long time. So I went with them. And as I'm living in Ketchum, and I'm actually running marijuana from Vancouver, Washington to Ketchum, Idaho. And I am selling marijuana, and that's what I was doing for a number of years. That's how I made my income. I would basically snowboard every day and hunt and fish and sell weed. And what would happen though is that some of the loads of weed that I would pick up were too big that I didn't want to keep them in a house. They were just too big. If I got raided in a house, I'd lose everything. And so what I did is I went to the mountains, and I would bury the weed in the mountains, and I would live in the mountains, and I would run into town, do my sales, and I would usually end up being back at the camp, hours before dark. So I would fish and collect wood, and I was living in the woods. And I was living up in an area called Neal Canyon. Is it okay if I disclose areas and stuff like that?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, we have
Okay,
researchers that listen to us.
Perfect. Okay, so if anyone's listening and they want to go out there, if you drive through Ketchum and you take a right and you go up into Neal Canyon, and you can Google Earth it, there's a house on the end of the road on the left that has horse barns and horse arenas, and I was doing some chinking work in that house for some spare money and things like that, pre-running drugs, and so I knew how to get up in there. Now, when you look on Google Map, someone had bought the property behind them, so there's another bigger house back there. But the campsite where all this stuff happened, where I told you about my dog Shane, which I'm about to talk about, is where all this happened. And the campsite's totally still there. So basically, I would go up there. You're allowed to live in a area in the woods for a certain amount of time before the game wardens make you leave. So I would go in there. I would bury the marijuana in the ground. I would cover it up, and I would hide it. And then I would stay there as long as I could, and then I would move. But that was one of my main areas that I worked. So at the time, I had an older Toyota. I had a canopy on it with a safari rack, and I had a wolf hybrid mix. That was my dog, and we were living in the woods. So what would happen is I would hear coyotes, which I thought were coyotes that were trying to call my dog out. So what they'll do is they'll try to call your dog out. They'll try to get it to go to the tree line. Sometimes they'll send out another, like a single coyote or whatever it is, to try to lure them out to get them in there, and then they'll kill dogs. That's the reality, right?
Yep.
So as this is going on, I'm hearing them and stuff, and at the time, because what I was doing, I had a 357 Magnum. It was a 7.5-inch barrel. Taurus long barrel, porter barrel is one of the best guns I've ever owned. Mm-hmm. Then I had a 22 long rifle. So I would target practice and things like that throughout the days, blah 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 blah. And so these coyotes kept trying to call my dog out, and it would happen at night. It would happen during the day, and then, like I was telling you one day, Shane, this is the part that I'm not very proud about, and people can think whatever they want about me. I really don't care. I'm just going to tell you what happened, and you're either going to like it or you're not. Okay. So I tied my dog up, and I used her as bait. So I went up the cut a little ways, and I found an area in the middle of the cut where I could tie her up, and I could see the tree line where the coyotes had been coming down off the top of the hill right there. And I went back into the back of the tree line, and I set up shop with my 22, and I figured I could, take a couple coyotes out with my 22. If not, at least I'll wound one of them, and they'll stop coming around. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't think Jason and I could blame you for that. You're trying to solve a situation,
Yep.
Anyway, so I tie my dog up. My dog is freaking out. And that's the part that I feel bad about, because she was looking at me like, what the hell is going on? Right. And so I tie her up. I step back, and so it sounded like three coyotes going back and forth, right? And they were working their way down off the top of this ridge. And I'm waiting to kind of see them so I could try to get a visual on them, so I could start taking some pot shots at them, right? Mm-hmm. And as they're going back and forth, and this is what I was talking to you about, Shane, it changed. It went from what sounded like coyotes into what sounded like almost like monkeys or chimps or apes or whatever you want to call it, going back and forth. And then it almost sounded like men screaming at each other. And it was so loud, and it was so just, I don't even know the words to really explain how it felt. It scared me so bad that I almost crapped myself. I stopped, and my dog was like totally freaking out, and I kind of snapped and came back to reality and was kind of like, what the F am I doing? Right. And so I went and I grabbed my dog and I went back to the left to my campsite and got in my truck and I drove off. And here's the crazy part. So that's what I remember about that. And I'm trying to give you guys the best memory I have of some of this stuff because it's been a long time and I haven't talked about this. So the first time I'd ever talked about this situation was with you, Shane, the other day, because it's just something that I'm going to tell people I'm tying my dog up for bait to kill coyotes, right? I mean, come on. Most people don't want to hear that, right? And then tell them that there's whatever there is screaming at me in the woods. I think I'm freaking nuts. So here's the crazy part about that whole situation. I didn't realize what was going on. The Sasquatch never even once popped into my mind. Like I just had no clue what it was. And I just didn't, Sasquatch wasn't registering. Right. So there was no coyote shit. There was no coyote sign. Now that I'm older and I look back, I would walk around that camp so much and look for sign and look for scat and there was nothing. And the crazy part is that, and I don't know if this has anything to do with anything, but where they would come down off that ridge is where I would go to the bathroom.
Okay.
I would walk up about 30 yards from my camp behind a log and I would dig a hole and that's where I would take a dump. And that was my spot. And I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but it's just kind of weird how they came off that ridge. And then after that, so I left, right? So then I'm not thinking Sasquatch. I go back into town. I'm hanging out with my buddies. I don't even say anything, right? I go back in there. I just act like it's all good, right? So it continues. The coyotes are trying to call her out, right? So I'm just whatever. Now she's sleeping in the truck with me. I used to let her run around at night and I'd sleep in the back of my truck, but I started keeping her in the truck and shutting the tailgate because I didn't want to lose her, right? And it just kept. So after that, one day, this is probably, I don't know, a few weeks later, I'm on the other side of the ridge. And I used to do a lot of mountain climbing and a lot of mountaineering and things when I was that age. And so I was working my way up the other side of the ridge. And if you Google map it, you can see where there's the ridge line gets real rocky and you have to actually start kind of climbing. Like it gets super elevated and you got to climb, right? Well, my dog has been everywhere with me at this point. I've taken her to the City of the Rocks. We've done climbs. I mean, I was living in the woods, so she really wasn't scared of much and she's been through a lot. So I'm trying to get her to go up this ridge and we reached this certain rock outcropping. And I think I mentioned to you when I said I got back down off the ridge, Shane, when we first talked. I don't know if you remember that or not, but that's what this is. And so I got up to this rock outcropping and you had to climb up it. My dog couldn't jump up it. So I grabbed my dog and I threw her up it. Right. And it was about 6 feet up and I threw her up it and I'd done that stuff before and she usually lands, sticks it and she's all good. Right. Well, I'll tell you what, she came off the top of that thing so fast. It was unreal. She stuck and whatever happened, she jumped off of it and then ran straight back down into the camp like it was no one's business and she was gone. And I'm thinking, okay, there's a cougar or there's something. There was a big cougar problem in Ketchum at that time. They had reintroduced the wolf and they had cougar problems. And so first thing I'm thinking cougar, right? And I remember getting this feeling that it was just this, it felt like something wanted to kill me. Like it literally felt like something wanted to kill me. And I don't know if it was a cougar or whatever it was, but I got up to that rock outcropping and I literally hit like a wall of fear. And I just turned around and I remember thinking, whatever it is, just get the hell away from it. And I just got as fast as I could down that. And I remember thinking, if it is a cougar, and this you'll hear this later on too when I talk about the baby crying in the woods, I remember thinking, all right, if it is a cougar, if I hunch up my shoulders, right, maybe it won't get my neck. I'm trying to climb down, and I can't. I'm trying to climb down it, and I have my sidearm with me, but I'm literally rock climbing to try to get out of this. So you can't rock climb with having a gun out, right? So I went down to the truck, and my dog was in the back of the truck. And once again, I'm not really thinking Sasquatch. I'm not thinking anything like that. But now that I look back on what happened, and I have spent years now listening to thousands of people that, Wes and all these other people and all these other podcasts that I listen to and things like that, that it's very possible that that could have been one of them watching me. And if you look at the valley that I was living in, if you really wanted to watch me, all you'd have to do is stay up on top of those ridges, and you can watch me all day long.
Well, so first of all, I would not have been surprised if you'd have woke up one morning and your dog would have been like right in your face going, listen here, buddy, if you do something like that one more time, I'm good. But that to me, like, any dog I've ever had, if they see something like that, even like a coyote, a dog is going to stand its ground against a coyote, maybe even a mountain lion. My dog had already been in multiple fights with other dogs, and she could handle herself, that's for sure. Well, and you toss her up there, now she's between you and, if it is a mountain lion, or if it is even a bear or something, she's going to defend you, okay, unless there's something that she doesn't think she can handle. And what do you, if she's, any dog I know is going to stand up for their owner, especially when it's just you two out in the woods out there. Her and I pretty much lived together for multiple years out in the woods. That's the reality. So yes, I agree with you. I think that there was something that scared her enough that she left me. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Well, so let's go back to that first story. So you really are now of the realization that there never was any coyotes. I don't believe there ever was. Now that I'm older and I think back, there was no scat, there was no sign. It was just sounds. That was it. And then the sounds that whatever those things were that were in the tree line there, or whatever they were doing. It almost seemed like, and this is the kind of crazy stuff, and this is just my view on what I think possibly could have been going on. Was it almost seemed like they were, how when you're kids and you're like, double dog dare you to go do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, almost feel like they were like, you go get the dog. No, you go get the dog. No, you go get the dog. Right? Like it was. Well, have you ever listened to like Ron Moorhead's Sierra Sounds? Yep.
It sounds like you're describing that samurai chatter.
It wasn't really like that, but it was definitely not coyotes, and it almost, but different.
Well, what I was going to say though about the Sierra Sounds is when you listen to that, it sounds like the two or three of them when Ron Moorhead and the guy that is with him are mimicking the sounds that the Sasquatches are making. It's like they're laughing to each other, or they're like, oh, it's like, just like you said, it sounded like some people daring each other, that they're actually having a conversation. Well, in the Sierra Sounds, when they mimic the Sasquatches' sounds back to them, that's what it sounds like to me when I listen, like the Sasquatch going, okay, listen, I'm going to make this sound, and we'll see if he can make this sound back to me. That kind of, just like you said, a couple teenage kids or young kids like going, okay, let's see what else they can do, But in your case, you're saying, well, you go get the dog,
Well, I got a theory on that.
They got excited. What it seemed like.
Yeah, I got a theory on that. I'm thinking maybe they were trying to lure the dog out there early on with the coyote sounds, because the dog is going to try to defend.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
that's what I think was going on. I think they were trying to lure it out so they could take it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't ever go out there. Like even at night, I would have huge fires because I'm out in the middle of nowhere and I'm all alone. So I'm having a white man fire. Sorry. Like I'm gonna light up so you know what I mean? So she never, ever, ever left that campsite. She would always be right next to me right there.
Mm-hmm. But back to that, if it really if those really were coyotes, they probably would have gone after them, I would think.
And more than likely they wouldn't be with that. But the bigger the fire that I have, I don't believe that if it was coyotes, they would be as close to the camp as they were.
No, not with that fire.
So the reason the dog probably, and this is all speculation, but it's the reason the dog probably didn't go in the woods was like, look, I know those aren't coyotes. I know what those are. I'm not going out there. You know?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they have much stronger senses than us. They probably smelled them. You know, I mean, the dog probably smelled that was no coyote. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
so that's what
smoke.
Idaho. So anyone that lives out in Ketchum or that area, that's if you want to go out and look for stuff, go up there and Neal Canyon on Eagle Creek and go camping and live out there for a couple months. It's interesting what happens when you live in the woods. People that camp and hunt and they go out once a year in the hunt, or they go out and camp, every now and then. It's different when you live there.
Mm-hmm.
When you live there, it's just a different world. So moving along, that happened, and then that was it. A bunch of crazy stuff happened with the lifestyle that I was leading. It is what it is when you're in that lifestyle, and I had to leave. So I left and I moved back to Washington State. I was actually living in Kalama for a while. I was basically out in the middle of nowhere because of some of the stuff that happened, and I just needed to be in the middle of nowhere. And I started growing marijuana with some of the guys that I grew up with. They were also the guys that were supplying me with the marijuana for Ketchum, and I started living in the woods again up in there, and I started growing weed and just, once again, when you live in the woods, I think there's more of them out there than what people actually realize. So I started having crazy stuff happen up there. And that's some of the other stuff that we kind of talked about a little bit. And I was, so Yakult, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Brush Prairie, Washington and the Yakult area and all that stuff. But there's an area called Sunset Falls, and it's, you drive up past Sunset Falls, if you Google map it, you're out in the middle of nowhere. Like there's not much going on there. And so we had rented a house at the edge of Sunset Falls next to Reinhold Creek. And then I had a house in Farger Lake, which was about 7 miles apart. And so me and my buddy lived in the house at Reinhold Creek, and I lived in the house at Farger Lake. We both had indoor marijuana grow operations going in those houses, and we would also prepare, a couple thousand plants to put out up by Sunset Falls. And what we would do is we would put the plants in 10 to 20 plots, so that if police came in or jackers or loggers or whoever found them, we wouldn't lose our whole crop. So we were basically working that whole area up there with ATVs and different things, and we had some stuff happen up there, and it's some of that stuff is more of the stuff that makes me a little uncomfortable to talk about, I guess I could say, because people don't want to hear some of the stuff that I think and some of the stuff that happened because they think this thing is an animal or whatever they think it is. I don't know, you know what I mean? But when we started working those areas, we what we would do is we had two sets of ATVs. We had stolen ATVs that we would use at night to take care of our crops, and then we had legally ATVs. So we would go in during the day in Weyerhaeuser land, and we made trails from the house up at Sunset Creek. I called them the bat trails, and we would go behind, we'd cover them up, and we'd get in there, and we would basically scout for spots. We would pack in material. We would try to look like hunters, basically, right? So if there was a game or forestry or loggers, we were acting like we were setting up our tree stands and everything we were doing to hike in there and hunt. So we were working this one area And this is the one that I was telling you about, Shane, when I heard the little kids and all that stuff. So me and my buddy Mike that I grew up with, and these guys that a lot of this stuff happened with are guys that, I mean, we grew up from first grade together. You know what I mean? We're brothers. That's the reality. Some of these guys are more family than me, than my real family. And so me and Mike were working this one area, and we had stopped at an intersection, and I remember it would have been facing east, and I remember sitting at the intersection, and we shut off the ATVs, and it sounded like little kids laughing and playing in the trees. And it was about 200-300 yards away. And my buddy Mike looks at me, and I looked at him, and I was like, "Did you effing hear that?" And he looked at me, and he was like, "Man, that must be ghosts." I remember looking at him. There's a fucking ghosts out here in the middle of nowhere, dude. What was that? Right? And sorry for the language. I apologize for everyone.
That's okay.
It's fine. I'm just trying to remember all this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and here's the crazy part. We went and worked that valley. So we went and planted some plants in that valley, and we had some stuff happen in that valley that has affected me. So basically, we ended up working that valley. When we first went into, what we would do is we would bring in compost in the spring. We would dig our holes. We'd bring in our fencing. We would bring in our compost. We would prep our holes. We would prep the plants. We would get the plants ready to ship out there when it was time to put them outside. So all the holes were prepped by the time. It was a full-time job, but I had to quit my normal job in order to grow marijuana because I was making so much money, and I don't care what people think, it's a full-time job. So we would spend all day prepping everything, and then when we had them out there in the woods in the summertime, we would shut down our indoor grow ops, and we would basically live in the woods, take care of them. So we were packing in everything, and we had went down that valley. And so we drove down that valley, and we parked our ATVs. And what we would do is when we would go out in the woods, we would look for basically where the human sign ends. And what I mean by that is that there's no trash, there's nothing that would have anything to do with humans except for loggers. There's loggers in there. That's something else we'll talk about. But other than that, there's no just normal trash. Hikers, you can tell when people are in areas regularly and things like that. So we would look for those areas, and then we would try to go a little farther to put our pots for our marijuana, right? So in that area, we had parked, and there was 2 meadows, and I remember this distinctly. You'd have to go over this big old growth log that was in between. There was like these 2 10-foot tall blackberry bushes on each side, and in the middle there was this huge old growth log that was probably 3 feet off the ground, and you could see where it looked like a really heavy game trail, right? So we started following the game trail, and we went through the first meadow. And we get into the first meadow, and there's no garbage or anything. And we're thinking, okay, this looks like a fairly decent spot. Let's walk around the meadow. And on the edge of the other meadow, there was like a tunnel almost. Like it almost looked like something large had been working its way through these trees, and it went into another meadow. And I remember walking through the tunnel, and I'm 5'11", 220. At that time, I was probably 215. Good shape, all that good stuff. And I remember walking in this tunnel, and I barely had to bend over to get in it, right? And I'm thinking, God, what is this, right? So I'm maybe thinking elk, I'm thinking bears, whatever it is, and at that time, that wasn't even a concern to any of us because we're there to grow weed. So we go into this tunnel, we find the spot, we find the second meadow, and it looks great. So we locate it, we end up coming back to that spot. So when we went to dig that spot, we go in there, and we are full Gore-Tex, Tanner boots, all that good stuff, right? So we got gear, and we're working, and we start digging these holes. And when we went in there was these 3. It almost looked like something had bedded down in the second meadow, and there were these 3 big circles that looked like something had bedded down, and it smelled so bad. It was like a super dank, musky, just animal, like what all of that combined smell. And I'm thinking, okay, these are probably satellite bulls, which are basically young bull elk that break away from the herd. They travel together and they try to start their own harems and all that good stuff, right? So, but then I'm thinking the time of year, they shouldn't be at that elevation. That's not where they're at. They're up by Suisun Creek in that area during that time of year. But I'm just thinking satellite bulls. So I'm just thinking, wow, that's a super, super dank smell. And it's really pungent and holy moly, but whatever it is, let's get to work. So we start digging holes, right? And I remember distinctly, if you've ever dug holes with a shovel, I mean, you're up and down and you're digging holes, right? And all that stuff, and you're breathing hard. And I remember trying to breathe, and when you inhaled, it almost burnt your sinuses because it was so pungent.
Wow.
And the smell so pungent, and it just, and I remember my buddy Mike, Mike didn't have a lot of experience hunting. He was the more, let's go on the backpacking trip. His mom was from Switzerland, don't cut down the trees, all that kind of stuff. But he was out there in the woods, but he never really hunted or did stuff like that, right? So he's not that familiar with animals, and he kept saying, man, what's that smell? And I just kept saying, it's got to be elk, dude. Like, let's just keep digging the holes. Let's get done with it and let's get the hell out of here, right? So we dig out the holes, blah, 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 blah. We leave, right? So we end up planting that spot. And so we're working that whole area. And what we would do is we would go out in the middle of the night, and once the plants were in the ground, and we would water them and take care of them at nighttime, because the cops don't come in with helicopters in the middle of the night. And usually the loggers get in there about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to fire up their equipment. So we'd try to be in there and out before the loggers got in there to take care of our stuff. And that's where we would use the other ATVs and all that kind of stuff, because if we needed to ditch them or whatever, which we did one time, and that's a whole nother story. You leave them and you go, right? So we would do that. So we planted that, and then Mike had wrecked his ATV. Before Mike had wrecked his ATV, there was, on the way to that spot, that was one of the only spots where we had to actually fill up our water jugs, because it wasn't next to a creek. And usually we would try to plant next to creeks, so we didn't have to water as much, because the taproot would get down to the water table, blah, blah, blah. So we would stop on the way, and on the left, there was this little culvert with a probably 5 foot by 6 foot little pond, I guess you would call it, that was kind of you had to get off the road and kind of crawl down into it, and it was kind of hidden by trees, right? And on the top side of it was a clear cut with a green belt in it. So there was a little bit of growth in the middle, but then it was cut in the middle, right? So we were in there one night, and Mike was the type of guy where when we were growing up, fight broke out, there was trouble, whatever it was. I mean, he was gone. Well, like, he was the guy that no matter what happened, he was gone, right? So we're filling up our jugs, and we would use the gallon milk jugs, and we would put them into Rubbermaid totes that were strapped onto our Polaris Sportsman 500 ATVs. So we would fill them up, we'd pack them out. We'd fill them up, we'd pack them out until we filled up our totes. So when we were in there on the last one, I remember looking up at Mike, and a baby started crying up above us.
Oh,
and
God.
It was probably, I don't know, 20 yards above us, somewhere in that range, right? And it sounded like a baby, like not a cougar. I've heard cats. I've you know what I mean? I know cats can sound like women and babies and all that stuff. I've heard all that. This was an actual baby. And I remember looking at Mike, and I looked up at him, and his eyes were, I mean, they were huge. And he looked at me, and the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "Don't effing leave me here." And I turned around to look at the baby again, and I turned back around, and he was gone. So he had totally left me there, and I immediately grabbed my jugs, and I remember thinking, glad I got my helmet on, because if something tries to grab me from behind, at least I got my helmet on, and I'll try to put my head back and maybe headbutt it or fight it off or whatever. And I'm trying to work my way back onto my ATV, and he had literally got on his ATV and he had took off. Like he was gone. And so I'm like getting on my ATV and I'm trying to start it up. As I drove away, it was just, I don't even know how to explain it. You know how you come around a corner and someone scares you and you do a little stutter step and you start moving real quick, right?
Yes.
And you're like, that to me again, or get smacked, right? Stuff like that. So it felt like that, but it was like, I was scared. Like I couldn't make that ATV go fast enough. Like I had that thing pinned, and keep in mind that we were riding these ATVs all day, every day, every day. Like we were good at riding ATVs. We knew the limits. We were out on those roads every single day, night and day. Like it was, and so I'm rallying down this road to try to catch up with Mike, who was already gone. And it felt like there was something behind me the whole freaking time. And so I finally catch up with him and he stops. And I'm after me, saying what I needed to say to him, like, what the hell, right? we once again, what the hell was that? Right? He keeps saying ghosts. I'm just like, dude, you're nuts. That wasn't a ghost. That was a freaking baby. And what the hell's a baby doing out in the middle of nowhere? Right. So we, once again, not thinking Sasquatch, we continued. I mean, we got, a couple $100,000 worth of pots sitting in this meadow over here. So we go get to work, right? We got to get stuff done. So we get to work, we water our plants, we get out of there. Mike ends up wrecking his ATV. So
that's, for the record, that's called karma. But
yeah, that would, I'll tell you what, if that's what karma is, this guy, man, he would wreck his ATV, he would wreck his truck, he just had like.
That's what happens when you leave your friends. That's what happens when you take off and leave your friends. You get what you deserve.
Every time something happened, he'd get hurt, and maybe it was karma. And you know what, Mike, if you're listening to this, yeah, you deserve that shit, 100%. So, basically. That's just, yeah, like what the hell? So we end up working this area, and one day we're out in the middle of the day and we're working another area. And so we're packing in compost and just fencing and material. Right. And we have our ATVs loaded up, and you got to be careful when they're loaded up. You can't take corners that fast. And I kept telling them, dude, don't take the corners that fast or you're going to end up rolling that thing. We're way out in the middle of nowhere. So sure enough, I come around the corner and all I see is his ATV completely mangled, and him, probably 50 feet from his ATV rolling around on the ground. And I come up to him and he's like, I feel my ass, look at my ass. And I'm like, okay. And so I roll him over and I pull down his pants, and sure enough, it looks like someone took a large cheese grater and just took off his butt cheeks. Right. So anyway, so I end up pulling his ATV into the bush, hiding that, slinging him up on the front of my ATV, driving him out, taking him to the emergency room. So we have all this marijuana out in the woods that I'm not going to let go to waste, and I need someone to help me. So we end up bringing in another guy named Ryan, who was actually older than us. And this guy had been raised in the area. He hunting, fishing, lived a life on the black market, blah, 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 blah. So I trusted him and we brought him in. So we would work that area with him. And then, so we go out, Mike gets a little better. So Mike's able to ride on the back of an ATV, right? And so we started working him back in there and going out with Ryan and stuff like that. Then he gets good enough that he can ride his own ATV. So then I put Ryan on the back of my ATV, and we had already cut him in on the profit. So we're going to cut him out. So we might as well use him for the rest of the crop, right? So we're bringing him out there and stuff like that. And then one night we go out there, and and when I say night, we're talking 2:30, 2, 3, like in the morning, right? So that same spot where I was talking about, where the old growth and the blackberries and the tunnel into the meadows and stuff, pull up. So Mike had already pulled up in his ATV. He had shut it off. And I'm just going to tell you what I remember. Okay. I remember pulling up on the left with Ryan on the back, my ATV, shut it off, Soon as Ryan started getting off the ATV, something ran in the front of us, ran into the tunnel, and then started breaking trees. So when it started breaking trees, I froze. Ryan froze. We were kind of like, what the hell's going on, right? Mike fired off his 30-30. So Mike had a 30-30 at the time. Ryan never carried firearms because he was already a convicted felon. He didn't want to add more time onto the sentence if he did get caught with the weed, right? I had my 357. I wasn't even thinking pulling my firearm, right? And he fires off his gun, and I remember looking back at Mike and I said, what the hell are you doing? People are going to think we're out here poaching. Let's get the F out of here before game wardens show up, right? As that happens, this thing's still breaking trees. So whatever it was sitting in the tree line right there as a gunshot went off and was still breaking trees. So the usually in my experience,
gunshot didn't scare it.
No. So in my experience, usually when you fire off a firearm, bears will take off. Mm-hmm. Deer, all the animal life that's in my Rolodex, they're gone. They're not hanging out there. And it broke 3 or 4 trees. It was almost like it seemed like something was in the tree line grabbing limbs and breaking them, because it sounded like the brakes were on 2 different sides. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened there. And so we left, right? We go back to the house up by Reinhold Creek at the end of Sunset Falls Road. That's where we had the weird deer incident I was telling you about, Shane, which we can talk about in a little bit. So that's what happened there. That's what happened in that.
So I do want to ask, so how far out? So how far out is it then where you heard the baby? Like that, you guys said you went beyond where it seemed like humans were there on a regular basis. So like where you heard the baby, was that out in a part where you thought that you were beyond where human activity?
Yes. 100%. That was in an area where we actually had a crop close to that as well. So it was in an area that was out there, and it was really only about maybe 1.5 miles away from the actual crops that we had right there.
Okay. So my question is, if that's a Bigfoot imitating a baby, how on earth, where did he hear a baby cry that far out in the middle of nowhere?
That's where you got me. I don't know.
that's what
happened, and everyone else can paint their own picture because it happened.
Right. Well, so. because we've heard. I mean, listen, Colin, you're telling us stuff this is stuff that other people have experienced, but to hear something mimic a baby, and this thing is way out where you're probably not nobody's taking their baby. How did it hear a baby, and how did it know that was a sound it may be able to make? That because much like the kite making the coyote sound to try to draw the dog out. Okay, if you wanted to get a couple guys that are out in the middle of nowhere curious about something, I mean, a lot of times you're going to say, "Wait a second, there's a baby out here. We got to go see if we can help this. Did somebody leave a baby?" You know what I'm saying? Okay. So how did this?
Okay. Wait right there. You would think that, right?
Well, they didn't know Mike was there, and he was taking off like a crazy.
That thought didn't even come in my mind to help that baby. My thought was, what the hell is that? And I want to get away from it.
Exactly. But what I'm saying is how did this creature think, okay, what noise can I make to possibly get these 2 grown men
to walk out?
To walk out to me, and how can I sucker them out? Because listen, if it made any other noise, I mean, you guys took off when it made a baby, so any other noise, you guys had probably taken off running too, unless it could imitate a 6 foot tall blonde. It says, hey. but isn't that's what really
in America? I'm not into blonde women, so.
But that's what really like freaks me out is, so how does this thing know that may be the one thing it could get you guys curious enough to go out into the woods to look? Because I mean, you gotta admit, a lot of people would be like, man, what's a baby doing? I need to go take a look, you know? That's what really freaks me out is how this thing figures out I'm going to sound like a baby and maybe get these. That is.
From everything that I've listened to, it's kind of crazy to say this, but are they master mimickers? Is that real? Do they really lure people out? And is that really happening? Part of me wants to believe that. And part of me is, I mean, I don't know, to be honest with you. I really don't know. I
think it's a distinct possibility that that's what they're trying to do is lure people out.
No, right. I think they are, but I think
something else. Like, what is it?
Yeah, I think the question is, Jason, are Bigfoot capable of that, or is that where the line where people say, no, that's not a Bigfoot. We're talking about an evil spirit out there. Because that's what an evil spirit would try to do, is lure you into more danger.
Well, these things, creatures or beings, whatever they actually are, they can create sounds that we cannot mimic, that we cannot do. So it would not surprise me, and I believe that they do get close to society when they can do it without being caught. And they probably have heard, or they figured that, you're going to be, I don't know, more at ease maybe because you hear it, you're young. So you're not going to feel threatened or whatever. So we might be looking at this all wrong.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I know that in that area back in the day, there is an old story about Yakult, and there was a town function. And I believe that there was something going on where a Sasquatch walked out in the middle of an opening and everyone in the town saw it. And this was like back in the day. So, I mean, wow. Are they that close to town that they hear us and they mimic us and they do things like that? Like, what are they really? Right.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So before I go into the other house we were living in, I just want to talk about something that happened in the house closest to most of our crops in the mountains. And we would basically, and I talked to you, Shane, about this the first time I talked to you, and it's a weird deer experience. So we would go out and we would run the quads during the day, pre certain time of the year, and we would get things set up. And one of those days we came back to the house up by sunset and we were hanging out. And basically what we would do is we would park the ATVs in the garage. We'd shut everything up and then we would have a drink. And the back of the house had, they weren't really bay windows, but it was just really large windows. So the whole back of the house was basically open up until about, 15 yards up until the tree line where it got really, really thick. And we got home one day and we were sitting there and this deer, it was a doe. It literally came barreling out of the woods and ran right up to the window and was literally in the window looking at us like it was like a horse. So I was raised with horses. So we would trail ride, do all kinds of things. And I barrel raced. And if you run a horse hard enough, they froth at the mouth. They're sweaty. You know what I mean? You take their saddle off and they're covered in sweat. And this deer looked like that. And the crazy part was the deer was like going back and forth in the window and looking at us. And I remember looking at Mike and my first thought was, oh, look at that. Let's shoot it. Right. It's an easy meal. So, and then we were like looking at it and I remember saying to Mike, well, I think it might be sick because of the way it looks and everything. And it was just really weird how it looked like it had got ran to the extreme. Like something was chasing it.
Like it was just like totally exhausted. Like you said, like after riding a horse, but that's not the first, like, it was almost like asking you guys for help. Like that's kind of like it was looking through because deer don't just come look in the window.
Exactly. That's the weird part. And that's why I say it was a weird deer thing, because they don't come up to you, right? I mean, let's keep it real. They run away from us because we eat them.
Yeah. And that's not, I mean, and I've heard that. I mean, Jason, I've interviewed the guy up around Mike up around the NASA facility who had the deer come flying out of the corn. And then as soon as he saw the guy, he just got all calm and just walked by the guy. Like, no deer sees a person and just walks, under normal circumstances.
Yeah.
It just walks by the, or walks up by the window and says, "Hey, here I am, come get me." I mean, whatever's chasing it is worse than what you are.
Right. And and the thing is even if it was a bear or, a cougar, whatever it was just weird how it ran right up to the window where we were at, and it sat there and looked at us and was going back and forth looking at us. I mean, I had enough time to literally look at this thing and look at Mike and be like, well, should we get the shotgun and kill it? And then we were like looking at it, and I looked at him and I'm like, this thing must be sick, dude. Like, we shouldn't probably eat it. Right. Like, I don't know. It was just, I didn't feel like he was either really sick or there was something else going on. And now that I'm older and I look back, I think that maybe there was something else going on. Like, maybe it was really getting chased to the point where it saw us, came out of the tree line and was like, okay, I'm safe. Right. Because whatever was chasing didn't want to come out of the tree line.
Yeah. And I, like I said, I've heard that on other shows, other people that are out hunting have deer act that way, where the deer sits right down by the stand. Like,
yeah, that's weird. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't.
unless you get a corn pile, right by the stand. It's not just going to come right up by the hunter,
Right. And like, we didn't have feeders, we didn't have anything. I mean, it was a wild deer that it was random and it just happened. And the weird part is this. So that was like, we had just got in and parked our ATVs and we weren't there maybe 15 minutes and it came out. So if what I think was happening, it's possible that these things were maybe following us just in a way. And it's just, I don't know. It's just weird. Like, what I think might have happened is kind of hard for me to say because people think I'm nuts, but it doesn't make any sense unless I piece it together that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Well, what sounds more, I mean, it almost sounds just as nuts to say that a deer came up and stuck its head in the window.
Right. Like,
to be quite honest, I mean, it doesn't sound any more nuts. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of talk about that real quick before I went into the other house that we had. And then, so talking to you guys and all this stuff was like, I sent you guys a message. It was a double-edged sword because it felt really good, but it also brought up a lot of emotions and a lot of thoughts and a lot of things that I haven't thought about in a really long time. And when we were talking about Idaho, I just want to say one thing about Idaho really quick, and then we'll get off of that, is me tying my dog up and having that experience, I was actually sleeping in a tent. And after that experience, I started sleeping in the back of my truck. But before that, one of the nights when I was sleeping in my tent, and it was just a 2-man little Kelty tent with a rain fly, blah, 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 blah. And I'd have me and my dog in there. And there was a green van that had pulled up in the green belt next to me and had parked in there like he was just going to spend the night, right? And so I didn't really, I'm just minding my own business. I have a fire to go to bed. About 2 o'clock in the morning, he fired off a 44 Magnum a couple times. And I remember being in my tent, hearing it, and I'm doing what I'm doing on the black market, so I'm paranoid, right? And just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not looking. Just putting that out there. So I'm paranoid, and so I hear the gunshots go off, and I roll over on my stomach, and I pull my gun out, and I remember laying in the tent, pointing it in the direction of the van, thinking, "What the f? Like, why is this guy shooting off his gun?" Right? And I'm wondering now if what I was experiencing there, he was in his van and maybe something had came up to the van, or he had seen something, or something had happened. Like and it was just kind of something that I had thought about, and I was like, I wonder, you know what I mean? Like if that had anything to do with the experiences that I was having in Idaho. So,
well, obviously he was shooting something, right? I mean,
and I'll tell you what, it wasn't, I mean, it was late in the evening. It was, in the morning, it wasn't, we were all asleep, like fires were down, and it was like something was around us, which was the weird part. You know what I mean? So, and if you're in a van, and here's the thing, if I'm in a van or I'm in a truck, you got to really like either shake it, right? Do something to get me to open a window or open a door and shoot off a 44 Magnum. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, unless I'm completely off, which I'm okay with being wrong, and maybe he was just drunk and figured he'd end the night with a couple gunshots, whatever. I don't know. It's Idaho, right? I mean, I could have went into a pawn shop and bought an AK-47 in Idaho with no licenses or anything, right? So I don't know. But it was just kind of weird how all that happened, and then I had all the experiences and then all that stuff. So it was just kind of weird. I just wanted to kind of say that out loud because I've never said that to anyone. So.
Well, that is, that's just one more, I mean, that's just one more thing, I mean.
One more thing I can't really explain.
Yeah.
I know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So anyway, I'll move on to the Farger Lake house. So we had two houses. We had one up by Sunset, and then we had one by Farger Lake, and they were about 6.5, 7 miles apart as a straight line, as a crow flies. And so we would work the areas. I would go back to Farger Lake. That's where I slept primarily. And Mike slept in the Sunset Falls house primarily. The Farger Lake house was a double wide modular, if you guys have ever been in those. So they're pretty good size, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Big kitchens. Part of it had a big window, all this stuff. So it was super dark and like dreary. Like the trees were really big, and it was always shadowy and dark, and it backed up to, there was a pond in the back, and there was just wilderness there, right? And it was out of all the houses I lived in when I was growing marijuana, it was the only house that I ever actually carried my sidearm with me everywhere that I went. So
wow, like in the house, like in the house. The
house, everywhere. I had my sidearm on me at all times, and it was weird because every single time I was in that house, and it was a safe house. So the only time anyone was ever there was either Mike, or if I had brought a female home that I didn't know. Like I'd go to the bars and I'd bring random females home that wouldn't know anything about me, right? And so they wouldn't really know what I was doing, and that was it. And other than that, I was there alone. But every single time I was there, I felt like there was something or someone there that was watching me at all times. So I'm in the house. It was just weird. It was always a feeling like there was something there. And half of the house at night, I wouldn't even light up because I would really just kind of go there and hang out for a few hours and sleep. And the other half was like all big windows on the other half. And I would like hang out by the kitchen and this little living area. And then I would just go to bed and wake up and do my thing and come back at night. Right. So I had issues with one of my past partners who was one of my connections to who I was working with. And we had ended up getting in a fight. And I had worked him over pretty good. And these guys were the type of guys that were stupid. They were stupid enough to do things that would hurt people, right? I mean, they would do all kinds of things. And they would, for instance, if you did something, they would go kill a deer, and they would, mutilate it basically and pump it full of arrows or do whatever they needed to do. And they would throw it on your porch and they would leave you a message, right? And that's how it would start. And so I wake up one day after getting in a fight, and I'm walking around my property, and on the backside of my property, there's a wood pile, and next to the wood pile, there was a deer head. So my first thought was, so I had shot a deer, prior to that, and I had drug it off into the back a little ways, and there was a little bit of a bottleneck, so I'd gutted it there, and I figured I'd leave the guts in this little bit of a bottleneck and maybe pick up some coyotes or whatever. There was all kinds of stuff running around. Like I would hear coyotes at night and all kinds of stuff, right? So I left that there, and something had came in and it was just gone. There was no evidence. It didn't look like coyotes come in and it's like a crime scene. They fight each other. They shit everywhere. They leave tracks everywhere. Right. I mean, bears will drag it off, cats will drag it off, but there's some type of track, and there was nothing. It was like, it was just gone. Right. And which was weird. And I was kind of like, okay, this is pretty weird. But I didn't really think anything of it. And so I just kept on moving on. And so when I found this deer head, my first thought was, oh, well, this must have been the deer head that I disposed of, but I disposed of it down the road. And I'm thinking, why would it be back here? My first thought was maybe a coyote had picked it up and left it in my backyard, which makes no sense whatsoever. And I'm trying to rationalize why there's a deer head behind my house by my wood pile. And then I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's Justin, right? Maybe he actually figured out where I live, and maybe this is his way of sending me a message. But why is he not putting it on my front porch? Why is it behind my house, where I have to walk behind my house, go to the left and go to the wood pile, and it's right next to the wood pile? Like, if he wanted to leave me a message, he would have thrown it on my front porch, hit the glass slider, and there would have been the message. You know what I mean?
Right.
Exactly.
So I'm trying to like rationalize all this, and it just didn't make any sense. And I knew it wasn't the same deer because the deer head that was left was a little spike, and I had killed a doe. So it wasn't the same deer. And so I'm trying to rationalize all this, which didn't make any sense. And then basically that house, we were doing a lot of poaching. So we were poaching in different areas around Sunset and Kalama and all kinds of things. And we would bring them, me and Mike would bring them to that house. And then there was a little shack. So if I looked out the sliders, the main kitchen, and I looked out the sliders from my porch to my Subaru, and I had a couple other Toyotas and stuff, there was a shack to the left that was probably, I don't know, maybe 20 yards, maybe, right? And that's where we would process our deer or our elk or whatever we were killing, right? Mm-hmm. And we would eat everything, number one. I'm just going to throw that out there so whoever listens to this doesn't think that we're just randomly killing things. We would eat everything that we shot. So we would process it there, though. So we would hang deer and elk there, and we would debone them because you can't take in non-tag stuff and to get processed into the shops because it's illegal, right? Mm-hmm. So we would just process them all there. And so there would always be little what I would call giblets of meat everywhere, right? Like just shit all over the floor. There'd be, you know what I mean? And now that I'm talking to you guys and I'm older and I'm starting to think about things, and I'm wondering if possibly I was accidentally feeding one of these things. Or if possibly it was one of the ones that had followed me from the other spot, because 6-7 miles really isn't anything in reality if you really look at it in the bigger picture, especially in a straight line. And so I'm wondering if they followed me there, or I was feeding one of them, because after the deer head, I had a female that I was Amy, and I had brought her up from Mexico. We had dated when we were younger. She had moved to Mexico, blah, 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 blah. She came home for vacation. I had brought her up to the house. She was there one night, and she had her dog Belle, which is a German Shepherd. And we went to leave, and I went to take her home, and something crossed behind my Subaru by that. So my Subaru was parked and the shack was on the other side of the Subaru, probably 5 or 6 yards. Right. And something passed behind my Subaru and screamed at me in that house. And when it screamed at me, it was, you could feel it. Like it was, it would just, you could feel it scream at you. And it was like a 3 or 4 pitch tone scream, but whatever it was moving while it was doing it. And when it was doing it, I remember looking up. And I remember looking up above the roof of my Subaru. So whatever it was taller than me. And I'm 5'11", and it was walking as it did it, and then it just stopped. And I remember pausing because it was right there, whatever it was, and Belle was on my right, and she had gone behind me and was whimpering, like making whimpering noises, like something was wrong. And Amy came out of the bedroom and was like, "What was that?" And I looked at her and I said, "It was just a big ass coyote. Go back to the bedroom." Then I took the dog and went back to the bedroom, and I didn't take her home that night. She actually stayed with me. And I remember going in the bedroom and basically just shutting everything down and sitting in the bedroom all night, like, what just happened? So I don't really know if what I think happened is what happened, but as I listen to all these other people talk about things, and I listen to all these different podcasts, and I listen to thousands of other people say all the same things that are happening to me, I'm starting to think that either they followed me back there and they were eating some of the leftovers of the deer and the guts, and that's what stole the guts, or there was a separate group of them that lived in the same area. And honestly, I really don't know. So I hear different podcasts say, they have ranges that are huge and all this stuff, but we really don't know. But then I kind of think there's more of them out there than what we actually think. And I think they're more hidden than what we think. And I think they're closer to us than what we actually think. That's just my opinion. So,
well, and like in that regard, for like me and Jason, where we live, it's a lot harder for us. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay.
Yep. I got you.
Yeah, I'm saying, like for me and Jason, trying to imagine where it is that you're, the environment that you're talking about, it's probably hard for us to imagine how dense and how remote.
I couldn't put it this way. That house, that Farger Lake house, I couldn't even keep houseplants alive because it was so dark and there wasn't enough light coming through the windows. Geez. I actually set up grow lights that I took from one of my marijuana grow offs and put them in my living room just to keep. Wouldn't that ruin your street cred for growing marijuana if you're using them to grow like daffodils or roses or something? Where I grow strawberries now under lights, so I mean, I don't care.
But back to your point though is out there in the middle of nowhere, it's so dense. There's probably, and it's all speculation. I mean, I've never lived out there. You have, so I got to listen to what you're talking about and try to put myself in your shoes and imagine what it's like to be out there in the middle of nowhere and hear stuff and see stuff and try to formulate like, okay, how many of them are out here? Did somebody, like you said, did somebody follow me 6 miles?
Right. I mean,
who knows?
If these things are what people say they are and what people have seen, 6 miles is nothing.
Yeah, of course not. I mean, if they could, yeah, I mean, everything that you hear, they can travel cross country, up and down through the river. It doesn't matter what it is. They have no obstacle that they can't climb. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, 6 miles through the woods is probably nothing to them if they really want something, So,
right.
Yeah, I can't even begin to put myself into your situation. So, but I will go back to the point. I will go back to the point where you're standing there with the German Shepherd, though. And if that wasn't what you think it is, the German Shepherd would have gone after it. Right. If that was just some dude walking behind your Subaru making a noise, the German Shepherd's going to go get it.
Mm-hmm. She whimpered and went behind my back, like legs, and was whimpering. Like something was, how the dogs make the noise like something's wrong?
Yeah.
Like it's not an attack. It's something's wrong, right? That's what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
It was weird. Like it was.
Trust me, I see the same German Shepherd on my mail route every day, and it is not sitting there whimpering. It is trying to break the log chain to eat me. So, a dog like that's not whimpering because of some human walking. It's something else.
Right, it's whimpering.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, that was Farger Lake, and that house, I'll tell you what, that house, I lived in a lot of houses growing weed, and you're growing weed. You got I had guns all over my house. Like, I had a gun hidden every 10 feet. I mean, that's just the life I was living. And when you're young and you feel like you're bulletproof and you got every gun you could possibly imagine, you're really not scared of much. And that house, for some reason, I always had my sidearm with me, and I always had a 12 gauge somewhere close where I could grab it. And it was just weird. Everywhere I went in that house, every time I went outside, every time I just felt like I was getting watched. One time I had a guy I grew up with that I knew really well, who I didn't normally sell to certain people, because I grew up with certain people that I knew were being watched by the police, and they had a record, but we were still friends. We knew each other. We grew up together. So we just wouldn't do business together. That's reality. But one time his connection wasn't providing him, and so he asked me to do him a favor. And so I was like, yeah, whatever, it's all good. And so I brought him up to the house, and I remember before he came up, I remember hiding all the weed in the woods before it was dark behind my house. Just in case, because if they're going to, come in and stick guns in my face and where's the weed at, they're going to have to find it. They're either going to kill me or they're going to have to find it. That's it. So I remember putting it away thinking, I trust them, but it is what it is. And reality is sometimes the people that you trust the most are the ones that hurt you the most. That's just the truth. So I remember when he showed up, putting him on the couch, and he even when he showed up, came in the house, and he was like, dude, why do you got your gun? Like, he asked me directly. He's like, why are you wearing your gun? And I remember telling him I wear it all the time when I'm here. And then I remember going in the backwoods, and I remember going to get the weed. And when I was going in the backwoods, and I didn't go much in the nighttime back there, it was just like just the feeling that someone is looking right at you, like really strong. And we've all had that feeling, and it was weird. And it was one of those things, when I got the weed, I remember grabbing the bag. I had it in a black hockey bag. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen hockey bags, but you could have put a midget in there.
Oh, yeah, they're pretty good size, yes.
Yeah, because a midget could set up camp in there and be just fine. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I remember grabbing the hockey bag, and I remember when I grabbed it, kind of, how you just want to move real quick? Mm-hmm. Same type of feeling I had when I was on the ATV with the baby crying, when I was trying to leave on the ATV, and I just felt like I needed to move. It was just weird. Like, that was one of the weirdest houses I ever actually lived in. And it was all the other houses I've lived in growing weed. I never had that feeling. I never felt like I was being watched. One time I was being watched, and I was being watched by the FBI, and they actually came onto my property and were acting like insurance agents. And when the guy was on my property, I came outside, and I had concealed weapons licenses, so I could carry a gun wherever I went. And I remember I saw him, and I remember putting on I had a shoulder harness where my gun was by my ribs. And I remember walking out, and I remember saying, what the F are you doing on my property? And he's all, oh, I'm just an insurance agent, blah, 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 blah. And then he ran off real quick. But it wasn't the same feeling that I had in the other house. It was a different feeling.
Yeah. And the one thing that keeps coming through my head is like the stuff that you were doing, probably the only people that are going to come up and mess around with you are people doing the same, that are in the same business.
Yeah, 100%. They're looking to rob me. That's reality.
Yeah, but they would also have to know you're carrying a gun. If you're in this sort of lifestyle, everybody's packing heat. Everybody's carrying a gun.
100%. And here's the thing, and it's like one time one of my buddies, when I moved back from Idaho, told me, he was like, dude, he's like, why do you have so many guns? And I said, well, he's like, you think someone's going to come in and he's like, what are you going to do over, $50 grand? And I told him, I said, and there's stuff that you don't know that happened in Idaho that was an eye opener for me. And I just told him straight up, I said, you know what? If someone comes in my house for 50 grand and they tie me up and they torture me for 3 hours, I'm fucking killing them. Like, sorry, like I'm going to try to defend myself before that happens. Mm-hmm. And he was like, okay, that makes sense. And then I said to him, and if people know that I have this, they're less likely to actually come in and try to do that. Right. Which is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
If I know that you got fucking high powered rifles and handguns and shotguns and every weapon that's going to take you out, I mean, they're coming in armed to the teeth. Like, that's just reality, because
Hello?
Hey, can you guys hear? Are you there?
Yeah, we can hear you now. We lost you there for a second.
So it's a situation where people aren't just going to come in and not expect to get shot at. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's true. So who's really going to do that? They either are willing to kill me or willing to get killed to get what they want, which is a reality, and people actually do that, and that's the truth. But it just doesn't. I don't know. You know what I mean?
It isn't worth going up and messing around and walking behind your Subaru, making a noise. You know what I'm saying?
It's also a different feeling when a human's trying to kill you. So I've had people that wanted to kill me, and the thing is that feeling when someone wants to kill you is a different feeling than I had when I was in Idaho with my dog when I got backed off the ridge, and a different feeling. It's a different feeling. So I've had people that wanted to kill me, and one of them was directly in front of my face, and I could feel it. I knew he was thinking that. I could feel that he wanted me dead. And the other one was behind me another time, and long story short, blah, 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 blah. He had a golf club. He was going to hit me in the head. I could see it in my partner's eyes looking across the living room, and I turned around and he was there, but I felt him behind me. And you feel that. Like, it's a real feeling, but it's a different feeling than what I was feeling with all this. Totally different.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, these are all long stories that we don't really need to get into, but you can feel when someone wants to kill you, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's some pretty intense stuff right there for sure. Very
intense. Yes.
Very intense.
So that's my Fargo Lake house, and that is just, to this day, I don't know what it was. I mean, I think I know what it was. That's why I'm talking to you guys. But reality is I didn't see anything. I didn't, you know what I mean? I've heard stuff multiple times. I've seen some footprints in different areas of Washington and been screamed at in different states. And I think there's more of them out there than what people actually think. I think there's a lot more of them closer than what we think. And I think that we take things for granted, and we're all too busy looking at our phones and worried about going to work, and we're not paying attention to what's really going on. But that's just my opinion.
No, you're probably 100% right, and most of that for sure, and we see that Jason and I've been getting that a lot here in Ohio with a lot of the sightings that are just like right there, right near people. Yeah. It's not out in the middle of nowhere in Idaho and wherever else, it's right there. It's just amazing to think that and then that just leads me to believe that they're more than just an animal out there walking around.
I don't think they're an animal. I think that they're more intelligent than what people think. And I think that think about it. Look at us as a species. We're horrible. We consume everything. We throw everything away. Most everything we throw away, there's a lot left over. So if they were smart, why wouldn't they get free food from us?
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
It's an easy meal. Like, let's keep it real. Like, why wouldn't they just feed off of us or whatever? And if they're smart enough to hide from us, whatever, whether they cloak or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like it's an easy meal. Like, let's go get in a dumpster. I mean, in Idaho, bears would come down and get the dumpsters every day. Like, it's and they're not even that smart. So if this thing's smart as us or smarter than us, yeah.
Exactly. That's a brilliant point. I mean, crying out loud, raccoons joined together and band together to get on top of a trash can and open the lid. Why wouldn't a Bigfoot?
They're little pirates. That's actually my favorite Spanish word is mapache. I love that word. It's raccoons. They're little pirates. I gotta love them. I mean, they're mean little things, but I love them.
Oh, wait a second. I think that's on the menu at Main Moon in downtown Bucyrus. I didn't know what that meant. Maybe that's mapache or whatever.
Mapache is mapache. Yeah, mapache is Spanish for raccoon.
Yeah, I think that's on the menu at the Chinese restaurant in downtown Bucyrus.
It tasted good to you too, didn't it?
It's good.
I will neither confirm nor deny. Well, Colin, this has been a great. I don't even know how long we've gone. We've gone a long time, haven't we, Jason?
It's fascinating. This has been a fascinating interview. Yes.
This is great, and I think our listeners are going to really appreciate you just telling it like it is. You know,
yeah,
and
it's what it is. All this stuff happened, and people can take it for what it is. It happened. I don't know what it is, and people can paint their own pictures. I mean, after listening to every podcast you can possibly imagine, I'm pretty sure it was some type of Sasquatch or something.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it just seems like because some of the things that happened to me have happened to complete strangers that I don't even know.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Halfway across the world. And it's like, we're all experiencing the same stuff, and it's not all a mass hallucination. One time I had so what I do for a living is interesting. I'll talk to about 1,200 people a month, what I do for a living. And so I talk about all kinds of things. And sometimes I talk about what we're talking about, depending on who I'm talking to. And I was talking to this doctor one time about all this, and she said to me, these were her exact words. She said, well, it's good to know that your delusion doesn't affect your life and stopping you from being successful. And I looked at her and I said, it's because I'm not freaking delusional. Like, it actually happened. And she just couldn't wrap her head around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's like, if I was delusional, I wouldn't be running what I do for a living and doing what I do. And it's like, it's not delusional. There's thousands of people that are saying the same thing as me.
Exactly.
And
yep.
so if we're all saying the same thing, it's not a mass hallucination. We didn't all eat psychedelics together. And even if you do eat psychedelics, which I've eaten a lot of them, I've never had any of this shit happen ever. Like, never. I don't really care what people think when they think, oh, you were growing weed, you were high, which we never got high when we worked. And even if we were high, that doesn't make you hallucinate. And even certain psychedelics don't make you hallucinate that way. So it's amazing to me how people quickly dismiss things and push it away because they don't really look at the reality.
Yeah, I had a conversation just yesterday, as a matter of fact, with some people who asked me, and these are people I've known my whole life, and they asked me, do you really believe that there's a Bigfoot running around? And I'm like, look, how could I not? I go, we talked to so many people, you know, I've had some experiences myself, and they just were like, well, we can't believe that. But they had just been talking about UFOs. And I said, but you want to tell me that you believe in UFOs 100%, right? And they go, well, yeah, absolutely. I go, so you believe? Yeah. I go, so you believe like intergalactic space travel is more plausible than a
being that exists on our planet?
Yeah, biological being. And they said, well, yeah.
That might possibly have different things that let's look at the cephalopods. Cephalopods are something that can touch a rock and you see the rock. So what is it to say that maybe this is something that we've missed along, a couple hundred thousands of years that just has different things it can do, like a cephalopod where people say it cloaks, right? Or it can access different parts of its brain, like a clairvoyant or whatever, because they exist, right? And people acknowledge that mental telepathy and clairvoyancy and remote viewing, the lady that could see you without your shirt on, right? All that kind of all that stuff exists, right? So why are we crazy? Like, let's keep it real. And then also you get religious people, which I'm very open-minded. I'm not religious myself. I do think there's a bigger picture. I just don't think it's what they tell us it is. So if you believe in religion, then you believe in supernatural beings that come down to this planet and all this crazy stuff. But then when I say there's a Bigfoot, you think I'm nuts.
Bingo.
Right?
That's, yeah.
It's really nuts.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and religion really relies on that you take a leap of faith. And
it is, yeah.
So, why do you question somebody actually seeing or experiencing something, but you'd be more likely to believe in just a leap of faith that something else exists, I mean,
no one's ever seen God come down, right? Like, people say they see miracles, which I believe miracles happen, but I don't necessarily think it's the way they think it happens. They associate it with us as humans. We associate things that make us more comfortable that we can recognize, so we can put it into our category of this is real, right? So they see a miracle and they think, oh, it's God. Okay, well, what if it's just that we actually have the capability to do these things, but we don't know how to trigger it in our brain, and certain situations make you trigger it without knowing that you're triggering it.
That's I like that. I like that.
Right?
I like that thought process there, because that very well there may be something to that, for sure.
Yeah. I had a guy 2 weeks ago in my sales room. He was a pastor, and we were talking about all kinds of stuff. And he had been to Africa, and he was saying he's seen cancer disappear and all this stuff, and he's seen miracles, which I believe him. I was like, I totally believe you. And he was so adamant. He was like, it's the power of God. And I said to him, what if it's the power of the people? It's just that belief of God is what triggered that person to activate that in their brain to heal themselves. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, just a thought.
Hey, look, I think it's a valid thought, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that God doesn't exist. And I'm not saying any of that, because none of us really know. It's like you said, it's a leap of faith, right? But I just think there's more going on than what people really, it's just so cut and dry. And I just don't think that it's that cut and dry. I think that there's breakaway civilizations. I think that there's civilizations that have existed that were more technologically advanced than we are now. And that's where we found some of their technology, and that's what we're getting at. And it's possible that maybe like Sasquatch, when you really research religions and things, it's like Shiva. So Shiva attacked, right? And had an Anyway, it's just there's so many different things that I just don't think it is as cut and dry as what we think. I don't think it's a monkey. I don't think it's some type of an ape. I think it's something different, and I think there's too many weird things that happens with lights, and some of these people that say they see them cloaked and they disappear and things. I feel like there's just way more to it than just some ape.
I for myself, I agree with you 100%, Colin. So, but I'll tell you what, I appreciate you reaching out and coming on the show, because, like I said, I think our listeners are going to love hearing your stories. And I mean, I can't even like I said, I can't put myself in your shoes, because you're out there doing stuff that I could only, just living out in the middle of nowhere, just in addition to the other stuff that you were doing, like you're living a life that I can't even imagine. So I'm thankful that you shared it with us, for sure. And I think people are going to get a lot out of the story, the stories you had to share.
And I hope so. And that's why I came on the show. I mean, it took me a long time to kind of come to this point, and I at one point I had reached out to someone else, and then I changed my mind, and I didn't do it, and blah blah blah, and now I'm to the point where I just want to talk about this stuff to people that actually are open-minded and
Yes.
and realize that I'm all I'm saying is what happened. That's it. Do I know what it is? I have no clue. I don't think any of us know what it is, but I know what happened to me, and that's it. And it's made me feel really good from the first time I talked to you guys to this time. It's like I said, it's been a double-edged sword. It's made me feel good, but it's also brought up a lot of thoughts and emotions and things that I haven't thought about in a really long time. And all I can say is that if anyone is listening to this and you're on the fence about coming on, you should. It's good to talk about it with people that don't actually judge you.
Absolutely.
And there's no BS.
Yep.
So that's really what I can say about it. So, and then maybe another time we can talk about some of the comment you made about the baby crying, and maybe it was an evil spirit, because there's other things going on that are just like that is just weird. So
yeah, we're gonna have you back on so we can flesh that out a little bit, because there's some possibilities.
Yeah, I have
there.
a couple other things that I'm not real comfortable talking about, because they're just things that it's just weird. I'll give you a Reader's Digest. I had a lady come through my sales room about a month ago, and for a living, she researched paranormal stuff. That's what she did for a living. And apparently she was famous. I don't know. I was like, oh, okay, blah, blah, blah. And so I started talking to her, and we started talking a little bit, and we weren't even talking Sasquatch. We were talking different things. And I mean, I've had things happen throughout my life, and I'm currently in a house now that has something going on, and it's not malice at all whatsoever. Things happen. I've never had bad energy, anything like that. And so I'm telling her about it. And then I told her, I said, I'm thinking about moving. And she looked right at me in the eye, and she said, wherever you go, that's going with you. And I just kind of looked at her, and I'm like, what do you mean? And she's all, well, you had stuff happen when you were a kid, and then you had stuff happen when you were a teenager, and then you're having stuff happen now. And she said, it's you, it's not the house. And I kind of looked at her, and I'm like, what is that? And I looked at her, and I was like, what does that even mean, that it's me? And and this is her opinion, and I don't know if I buy this. I'm just, this whole conversation actually scares me. I'll be really honest with you. Where different people have different frequencies, and they have different things happen to them because they're functioning at a different frequency, and that's what she believes. I don't know if that's really what's going on, but I've had some different weird things happen that are not Sasquatch or anything that we're talking about, and it's just a different deal. So, yeah.
All right. Well, now that you've teased everybody, we'll have to talk about when we're going to have you on to talk about that. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, have another conversation about that, because that has nothing to do with. I don't think it has anything to do with Sasquatch, but I could be completely wrong. You know what I mean? I don't know. But some of this, yeah, that's another conversation. So yeah.
Well, Colin.
It's the crazy part. I'm okay with telling you about all the stuff that I think might be Sasquatch, right? Because I don't know what else it could be. But then this other conversation is something that makes me feel uncomfortable.
We can we'll ease you into it, like into a cold bath. We'll just ease you into.
And you guys hear all kinds of stuff where it's like the norm for you, but it's just, I don't know. It's just weird. I'm the older I get, I'm starting to believe that there's more truth to some of the Bibles and different religions than what we actually think. I just wish I could have read the original book, Pre-Conquer Kingdoms and Pre-Bloodshed, because people conquer kingdoms and then they rewrite history. And I just think that there's been a lot of stuff that's been lost. There's a lot of truth to it, is what I think. So,
yeah, I don't have any doubt about that, for sure. Man has a way of really screwing stuff up. So, yeah, I think they've kept a lot of the original truth hidden away. It's somewhere. You better believe it's somewhere hidden away. And someday somebody will get a hold of it and blow our minds. I hope we're all around to see it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we'll see. The world's pretty crazy right now.
Sure is. That's an understatement. Yeah.
Yeah, the world's nuts. And see, me, I'm living down south, watching the United States function, and to me, the United States is nuts. And it's so crazy. I look at the States, and 20 years of living in Mexico, I look at the States, and I'm just like, what the hell has happened? Like, holy crap!
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's insane. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. So.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up for this episode, and we'll, like I said, thank you so much, Colin, for coming on and sharing with us, and hopefully we'll get another chance to have you back on and talk about some of the other stuff.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you guys for.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. I appreciate it, and I think a lot of our listeners are going to appreciate this too.
Yeah, and it's you, and thank you guys for letting people like me come on here and not judging us and not ridiculing and not trying to debunk everything that we say. And it's I mean, it is what it is. Things happen, and sometimes people see them. Sometimes, like me, I never saw them. I heard them. I had all kinds of different stuff happen, which makes me think they're there. So it is what it is. But I appreciate you guys actually allowing people like me to come on and do this. So.
All right. Well, we're thankful that you came on. So.
Yep. I think this interview here is going to help a lot of people out, because the things that you experienced, a lot of people have too, and they never saw these. I like to call them creatures, but I really think they're much smarter than a creature. I think that's a huge understatement. But,
I agree.
But I'm telling you, it would help. It would help a lot this here, because people have experienced things, and when nobody else has experienced something that you have, and when you try to tell somebody, people think you're crazy. And on this platform, we take it seriously, and we are building a huge following, and that's what we do. We're here to learn. We're here to learn from other people's experiences and try to figure out what these things are. The things that are unexplained, we need answers. And this is how we're going to get them.
That's good. Cool. All right. Well, then I'll let myself go. And once again, thank you guys for having me on. And yeah, maybe in the future we can continue about the other stuff. So
that sounds like a plan.
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to it.
Have a good night then.
Yep. You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.